All right, everybody. Welcome to today's stream. We're doing something a little bit different. We are not painting miniatures tonight, so if that's what you tuned in for, I am sorry. You're going to have to wait for next week. We had a whole bunch of streaming during CavCon, so thank you again to Talon Games for hosting that and inviting me to be part of it. In the meantime, today we are doing our in-depth review of Deadlands: The Weird West. I got my Kickstarter, and yes, L West UCF. No painting minis today. Thank you for joining us, though. We do appreciate it. CavCon was great. CavCon was a lot of fun. I did some really fun painting. The guys at Talon Games are good dudes. They're very passionate about their game, and that is something I want to talk about: is passion for games, because you get products where you can tell that the people running them are super passionate about it, and it comes through in the product, through the quality. So we are going to go and hop in. This is not the entire Kickstarter pledge I had. I had some extra bits and bobs, but this is what I feel comfortable reviewing. We have the Deadlands: The Weird West box, and this is the core book, but we're going to go over everything in a little bit. We also have my normal, my standard beverage of choice for my stream. So this is going to get posted to YouTube as soon as I am done with it here, so people can hop onto it. First off, I do want to give a little bit of history. Deadlands has been around since the 90s. It is considered a classic RPG. Savage Worlds, which is the system it uses now, came out of Deadlands. Eventually, Savage Worlds did a resurrection of the Deadlands setting with Deadlands Reloaded. They did another revision with Deadlands Reloaded Revised, and they broke it up into the Marshals of Players book. This is the third iteration of Deadlands for Savage Worlds. Now, we're going to go and break up this review into a couple different things. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on my experiences with Deadlands in the past. We're going to go ahead and give an overall view for somebody who has not experienced the Weird West before. And then we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty. We're going to do a lot of comparison to the previous versions. We're going to talk about the stuff I like, the stuff I don't, the criticisms I have of it, both positive and negative. Spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't really feel like watching the rest of the video and getting into the nitty-gritty and watching me yammer on about this for an hour. It's a 9 out of 10 product. 9.5 out of 10. Like, this is an absolutely fantastic product. I only have a few criticisms of it. It is fantastic. If you enjoy Savage Worlds, go pick it up. If you're just looking for something different tabletop role-playing wise, pick it up and give it a try. It's tons and tons of fun. It's a very unique setting. It's a very unique world. And there is nothing else in the world quite like Deadlands. So we'll go and start out that Deadlands: The Weird West takes place currently, according to the back of the book, the year is 1884. Now, my background with Deadlands, I started back in the very first edition before it got revised when I was a teenager, when the year was 1876, 13 years after the Reckoning. Now, Deadlands is a game of Western horror. Think cowboys and zombies. There's a bunch of different types of horror in here, but it's largely in the kind of action horror aspect. I tend to run mine as more atmospheric, but that's just because just the way I run things tends to be much more atmospheric. But it is all about 6-shooters and monsters that don't care if you have your 6-shooters. It is an alternate history. The year 1884, the Civil War dragged on for 10 years, causing all manner of problems. And now the game has basically moved. It used to be that the Civil War was still going on, but that has changed in the new edition with one of the major setting changes, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But as now, it's basically kind of like a late 1800s Reconstruction era Wild West. Currently in the time frame, the West is still wild. It's becoming a little bit less wild. The Transcontinental Railroad has finished, but the place is still not a United States. Most of the areas you go to aren't even states. They're still territories. There are monsters on the high plains, but most people don't know they exist. They stay in the shadows. They're very covert. This is a game about things that go bump in the night. It's about campfire tales and local native legends coming to life. It's about death, famine. It's about going without. It's about going where even the terrain in the Southwest and Death Valley can kill you. It is a gritty setting, but it's also got this really just wry sense of humor to it. There is a steampunk element to it. There are things that we interpret as being supernatural, but the people in Deadlands do not. And we're going to go and start getting into stuff now. So first off, let's go and put this up. There are basically two different products that I'm going to be reviewing at the moment. There's the core Deadlands book, which is this hardback book. This does not have the system. This is just the setting. You will need a copy of Savage Worlds Adventure Edition to run this game, and if that's not part of your gaming library, it should be. This book retails for $39.99. It's available for pre-order now. I got mine in the Kickstarter fulfillment, but it is a just nice trade paperback, comic book sized, just shy of 200-page setting book that has everything you need to know about the Weird West. Once again, the basic system is not in this book. You will need the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition core book for that. Hey, Alejandra Dell, my precious. Yes, we are doing our deep dive of Deadlands: The Weird West today. The second product is this giant box set. And I believe this MSRP is for 100. And it's going to come with, it does come with the core book, but I have separated out and I've got some notes to go over. So here is what this box comes with. Now, this is something that I'm very, very happy that they did. They have, let me go ahead and fold it out so you guys can see it. This is not an unboxing, by the way. I've unboxed this stuff and I've been playing it for a while. It is a large folder map, Smith and Robards map of the Western states, and it shows all of your major battles, your territories, your rail lines, which is very important in a Western setting. And it's a nice thing that you can put out and show your players, because this West is a little bit different to our West, and we'll go ahead and get to that. Now, we have the standard things that you would expect to have in a Savage Worlds book. You have a dice set with a custom wild die with a little image of a cow skull, longhorn, on the 6 for the wild die. We have more of these little PowerPoint/ammo trackers. Now, you may go ahead and ask, why would you need something to keep track when there's only 6 bullets in a 6-shooter? Well, Winchester rifles can have up to 15, and there's also whole PowerPoints for spellcasters. I know all my spellcasters use them. They like having them. Nice little useful thing. The other thing this comes with is a nice big stack of custom artwork bennies. Now, these are the standard weighted poker chips that you get in Savage Worlds products, just with Deadlands-specific art on them. And you get the normal stack. So this stuff is all kind of to be expected for a Pinnacle setting box. Next, we have these. Now, this is a stack of two different stacks of cards. LWest UCS's PowerPoint discs are amazing. Yes, he is, in fact, one of my spellcasters, Alejandro Dell. I miss those sets, maps, dices, etc. cards. Yeah, it's nice having them. And I know Pinnacle is moving more to the box set thing. And I kind of like that. I like the idea of having all the bits and bobs. Now, the nice thing is you can get the core book by itself if you don't want them. This is by no means required. So we have, this is a stack of what are called archetypes. Now, archetypes are good for a couple different things. First off, if you are just doing a single one-shot and you don't want to go ahead and have to go through the rigmarole of character creation, you can just literally toss these out to your player characters, and there are all manner of different things that you can play. Now, I'm going to hold on to these as we go over the book, because I'm actually going to go through. The nice thing is, these are all, in addition to being archetypes that you can easily do, these are kind of like the standard character classes of Deadlands. And we're going to go over how all of those have changed with the new edition. Next in here, we have a couple different smaller card decks. First off, power cards. If you have the Savage Worlds core box and the deluxe box, you're going to have basically a deck of these. These are all of the powers that are specific to Deadlands, as well as some that are just kind of updated. But the ones that are specific to Deadlands, like Wilderness Walk here, actually have the Deadlands logo in them. It's a nice little touch. I'm glad we have them, because quite frankly, these things are a godsend to people who are playing. One of the points about Savage Worlds is they call it fast, furious fun. They don't do that by making the game simpler. They do it by removing the bookwork. And that's probably the single most brilliant part of Savage Worlds, is once you get to know the game, there are enough accessories. The game lends itself to not having to reference the book. I've been running tabletop role-playing games now for 25 years. I always tell people that if you want to speed up your game, you can try all these different tricks and tips, but the most important thing you can do is keep the books closed. Make sure you have your notes, make sure you have your reference material in front of you, but the moment you open up a book, that is when things slow down. So the next thing we have on this little card deck, we have a set of infernal devices. Now remember how I said that there are a steampunk element to get to Deadlands? Well, this is what these are. These are some of the more common steampunk devices that you can just buy. Now they are not cheap. Like I know you say an infernal flamethrower, $700. Oh, that doesn't seem much. It's only $700. Remember, this is 1884 money. This is when cowpokes can be expected to make $1 a day. That's a lot of money for that time frame. And next up, you have from the adventure deck. Now, I am not exactly a fan of the adventure deck in Savage Worlds. I know a lot of people like it. I'm happy that they did these where there are some Deadlands specific adventure deck cards. Basically, what the adventure deck does is that you deal out these like high plot element cards that everybody can use once per session. I generally don't care for it because I think it just adds a little bit of complexity to the game that the game doesn't need. But I know people who just have an absolute blast with them, and they can be amazing stuff. Like here, this one just lets you lets a member of your party re-roll a critical failure, which is huge. There's stuff that interacts now with the Herod, which we'll get to. Stuff that interacts with dealing with the devil if you're playing a huckster, which we'll also get to. Stuff that happens with duels when you're actually doing like a gunfight at high noon, quick draw. All sorts of stuff, and that's nice. I mean, if you use the adventure deck, they're really nice additions. I personally don't care for it, but I just don't use the adventure deck. Next, we have the second product that can be purchased on its own, like probably in stores. It's the GM screen, and we're going to go into the GM screen is going to have a couple different things. It has the showdown at sundown, just the normal adventure that Pinnacle includes with their stuff. It is a adventure for seasoned rank characters. Now, something to note: all of the archetypes are seasoned. This is for seasoned characters. The new box set for campaign, the Horror at Headstone Hill, is for seasoned characters. One of the differences that they have in this, they don't directly state it, but I do believe the intent is in this edition of Deadlands that characters begin seasoned. You are not dealing with novices. You are dealing with badasses already. Hard men and women who can face the horrors and hardship of the West. I love drinks. All right, next we have, finally, actually no, not quite finally, but the next we have. This is the GM screen. Now the GM screen it's got that nice little low landscape format so you can easily see above it. You got Deadlands, you got the 4 cowpokes that go around across the prairie and things moving into being a little bit creepier. The artwork's fantastic, but what we really want is what's on the back of the screen. So here, this is where I'm going to go ahead and do the first comparison. I have right here, this is the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition Core GM screen. What's on the back here with the reference is not the same. Not exactly. So your combat options and situational rules are identical. This is word for word verbatim, which is good. It's stuff that you want to have. The damage, injury table are identical. It's stuff that you want to have. This is where things start changing. Whereas the core set next to it has creative combat and bullets per rate of fire, you don't run into automatic weapons that much in Deadlands. You do, just they're not very common. Instead, you have the fear table and what the fear penalty is, and this is very, very important. Both of these. This is a horror game. You need to have the fear table, and I'm so happy that they put this on the back of the GM screen. And then the final section, you have on the core set, you get the reaction table for NPCs, an object hardness table, which is the same on the Deadlands screen, but here you get the vehicle critical hit and out of control table. Deadlands, once again, vehicles exist, but they're not that common. Instead, they decided to put in over here the basic thing for dealing with the devil, which is going to be hucksters, and we'll get that. I'm glad they put this on, as well as the infernal device malfunction table. Yeah, by the way, all that steampunk stuff has a bad habit of not exactly working the way it should. It's only on a critical failure, but that's always, the worst time for that to malfunction. So then we have, finally, this is the last little bit we have in the box set. We have this little deck of 6 cards. Now, I like the fact that it's got like this wonderful demonic artwork on the back. These are the Herod cards. Now, one of the big aspects of Deadlands, the Weird West, is that you're not necessarily dead if you're dead, or at least you might not stay in the ground. It's possible that a Manitou, an evil, malevolent spirit, will go ahead and grab your character's soul, shove it back into your body, and then animate it. So you'll be walking around undead. And Manitou has a habit of taking control. Now, this edition really changed the way the Herod work. Now, you can, instead of it just being that they try to take control every now and then, you can voluntarily let the devil loose and gain a giant shot of power for the remainder of an encounter. However, afterwards, and I can't wait to have one of my players just hold this kind of cards up to them, say, draw one and do not look at it. And then you find out what they do once they have a little bit more control. It's magic, malevolence, mayhem, mischief, misfortune, and murder. Now keep in mind, this is a demon inhabiting your character's body that suddenly you're giving them control. So you better make it worth it. You better only use it in dire circumstances. I cannot wait to be using this, and this is an example where having a card that they're drawing is going to have so much more effect than just a simple roll on a table. I mean, this way they can even, I promise you, where they know what's going to happen. They don't know exactly, but they know something bad's going to happen. They're going to squirm at having to pick which card they draw. It's completely random, but it's still going to put everybody's teeth on edge. Normally, in my campaigns for Deadlands, if a character is Herod, typically by the end of that campaign, the player characters put down that character. They will normally eventually vote. It will be unanimous, and they will shoot him in his head in his sleep. It's happened every single time. So that's the core set. Now, as far as whether or not the box set is worth the money, that really winds up coming down to you. If you just want a traditional standard book RPG experience, you can probably pass on the box. But I personally think it's going to be $40 for the book, $20 for the screen. You're basically paying $40 for all the extra stuff that comes in here. And I think, personally, I really think it's worth it. I like having all the extra stuff to just give a little bit more immersion and feel towards what's happening. All right, so let's get on to the actual core book. We're going to do a quick page through this, and I'm going to go ahead and explain Deadlands for people who have never experienced it before. So first off, on the inside, you have that nice map of the Western states, easily referenced on the inside of the cover. Okay. You got your table of contents, yada yada. Very, very extremely brief intro into what it is. They talk about the history is not our own, new nations rise. One of the big aspects of Deadlands is that the United States is no longer united. Even the territories are no longer united. Because the Civil War dragged on for so long, there are independent nations within the continental U.S. Two native groups, the Dakota, up in the Dakotas and in Oklahoma, basically bonded together, and because they were able to reclaim the medicine of their spirits, they created these independent nations called the Sioux Union and the Coyote Confederation. Sioux Union being in the Dakotas and part of Montana, I think. Part of Montana, part of Wyoming. Then down here in the Coyote Confederation is like the 5 civilized tribes that got sent over on the Trail of Tears. Well, they've reclaimed their territory. There is a great rite that was done in the Sioux Nations where basically the white man's technology just doesn't work. Outside of the Treaty City of Deadwood, which is a hotbed of intrigue and is a powder keg ready to explode. Coyote Confederation, they just patrol their borders very zealously and are not people to be trifled with. So then, outside of the native lands, there is Deseret, Utah. One of the aspects of Western history is the Mormons in Utah always said that one day they were going to claim independence. Well, here they have. And they were aided in no small bit by Dr. Darius Hellstrom, the world's foremost practitioner of the new science. Darius Hellstrom owns Hellstrom Industries and Wasatch Railroad. Wasatch Railroad won the Great Rail Wars, and it was the first one to finish the Transcontinental Railroad. They use a material called ghost rock, which we'll get to in a little bit. But needless to say, Salt Lake City is the most technologically advanced city in the world. There is also, down here, the Free City of Lost Angels. So this is another kind of deep cut, but if you notice, the coast of California is a giant crag of a maze. It's now actually called the Maze. Basically, the good fertile part of California was dumped into the ocean when a great earthquake hit. And there's a preacher who wound up leading his flock into Los Angeles, basically, and wound up declaring his city the Free City of Lost Angels, kind of like a Vatican deal. He's not around anymore because of reasons. So let's get back over here to the brief description. Goes into the authorities, where they go and talk about the difference between your territorial rangers and the agency, which is your shadowy government, wild West, Jim West type place. Explorer Society, which is a front for the Twilight Legion. Spoiler alert. Then they go ahead and talk about a tour of the West. Up here, there's the Morgana effect, which we will get to when we talk about things that have changed. But they talk about the major different regions, as well as here Cowboys and Zombies, where they talk about you don't need to do it as a horror game. You don't need to do it as a straight Western. You can run it anywhere in your thing. And I know Shane Hensley is really big about people making games their own. Okay. This is a standard chapter when every Savage World setting, making heroes. They do go through all of your standard Western concepts. So just to give your people an idea of exactly what type of characters you can play, because a lot of times I know people who come in from a D&D type setting where they're expecting classes and very strict, rigid character creation. Lots of times people just don't know where to go, and this is a good way to do it by just looking at their archetypes. Now they do comment here as well, the fairer sex. Now, one of the aspects of Deadlands, because the Civil War dragged on for so long, a lot of the women's empowerment that happened from women going into the workforce in our world during World War II happened instead in the mid-1800s. Also, as an interesting historical note, large portions of the West were far more welcoming towards women's equality than other places were. Really, really fascinating stuff if you look into it. It was a much more egalitarian time. It was a much more egalitarian area than people think of at the time. But they don't call out that even though this is a historical setting, it doesn't matter if your character is female, male, anything in between, anything different, black, white, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, anything. You're welcome to do it. Everybody will wind up fitting in the West, and people really aren't going to look at you scants either way. Move on. They do a comment that they use the contemporary term Indians to refer to the collective Native American tribes. It's inaccurate and it is dated, but it's generally considered non-pejorative. And it fits the time frame, and that's the main reason why they do that. All right, making heroes, race, congratulations, you're human. Just that's the way it goes. There are no dwarves and elves in Deadlands. Now they go ahead and say the standard character creation through Savage Worlds, your hindrances, your attributes, skills, derived statistics, edges, gear. None of this has changed. This is all exactly the same from the Savage Worlds core book. Gear started with $250. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but in 1884 money, that is a lot of friggin' money. Background details, and this is the part that's added. Your worst nightmare. This is more than background. If you're playing at Deadlands, make sure to fill that out. New hindrances. Here's the call-out section on racism and slavery, talking about because this is post-Civil War. It says racism is bad because racism is bad, and the West was a much more egalitarian place than people realize. Bigotry, violence, and racism remain, but they are the province of villains and the shamefully ignorant. There you go. It's been said. Make sure to just, if you're going to feature uncomfortable content in your game, just read the room. Know your players. We're all here to have fun. There's a couple new hindrances. Most of these were in previous versions. Aelin, if you want to play a Doc Holliday type character. Cursed. Curse is just fun. The Game Master gets a free Benny. Grim Servant of Death is always fun. Just people around you die. Heavy Sleeper can get you killed in Deadlands. Henceforth, Wyatt is a new hindrance. Lion Eyes, Night Terrors, Old Ways Oath. So many of the natives have sworn to forego any advanced technology and return to their the old ways. in order to gain favor of the spirits. This basically means you've taken an oath saying you will not use this advanced technology. Talisman is specifically for people with an arcane background. Means like all of your magic, you just have like a crutch that you have to use. Otherwise, you take penalties. Tenderfoot, from back east and you are not accustomed to getting out wet. Trouble Magnet, it just, bad stuff happens to you. All right, new edges. I'm not going to go over these one by one because I'm going to go over them when I'm talking about like the things that have changed. I'll go over the ones that are important. There are a lot of different arcane backgrounds. So arcane backgrounds are basically magic and Savage Worlds. And there's a couple different ones that you can do. Now, I did mark over from some stuff that I particularly like. Gallows Humor is a wonderfully flavorful edge. Basically, whenever you are going to make a fear roll, you can instead make a taunt roll to crack a joke at what's so scary. And if you pass, you give everybody around you a bonus to that fear roll. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Your standard combat edges from Deadlands. Quick Draw, Fan the Hammer is important. Professional edges. All the stuff that you would normally expect. This goes on for a while. Now, gear and goods. Gear is an important part of the Wild West. This is a setting where you're not going to be using swords as much. You have guns. And guns are better than swords. I'm sorry. If you don't believe that, there's a reason why we don't use swords anymore. I also like how there's an option for cheaping out. You can cheap out on any gear and make it cheaper. That's not going to be as good as you would have hoped. Now, I did mark out because there's a particularly wonderful thing. This is a mechanic that I have never had a player choose, but I'm so glad it's in here because it adds so much flavor. Typically speaking, your most expensive piece of equipment is your horse. Horses are expensive. You can have a horse be cheap. You can spend half the price on a horse, but that horse is going to have hindrances. Maybe they're mean, maybe they're elderly, maybe they're young, maybe they're just a big fat horse that can't run that fast. Maybe your horse is just the dumbest horse on earth. All of those things are options if you decide to cheap out on horses. I also like the idea of having a horse that's wanted, where basically that horse was rustled, like they were stolen from their ranch, and if you get caught with that, you might get pinned for the horse thieving, which is a hanging offense. They've got the rest of the standard equipment that you would expect, all the stuff that you want to have. Melee weapons. Actually, no. Melee weapons, it's a good idea to have one, but it's not as extensive fantasy setting. I put this note here for the personal Gatling weapons. Now, personal Gatling weapons, because the steampunk technology does exist, they've been around for long enough that they're no longer like malfunctioning all the time. They are still expensive. But keep in mind, your carbines, rifles, and shotguns only have rate of fire 2, which means that unless you are building into this, mechanically speaking, it is better. You're better off just having a standard gun and taking 2 shots, because you can do that. Now, you can really unload by just holding on that trigger and emptying your entire drum in one go, and you're putting a lot of lead in there, but you're probably not going to hit much by doing that. The Gatling pistol, rate of fire 3, it's a fantastic weapon. It's also $400, so they are not cheap. Now here are your standard guns. Remember when I said that there are guns? The Wild West is about guns, firearms, revolvers. You have derringers, which are tiny little things that are made for concealable. Single action revolvers, which are the ones you actually have to cock the hammer back before you pull the trigger. Double action, which automatically cock the hammer when you pull the trigger. Carbines, which are basically rifles with shortened barrels that are more useful for close range situations. Rifles, which are rifles. The Winchester 76, the gun that won the West. Don't ignore this if you're playing a character. If you don't want to use all the gunslinger edges, get yourself a Winchester. It's easy to use. It does a lot of damage. It's got great range. It's amazing gun. Shotguns. Shotguns are extremely useful in Deadlands because you will find yourself in close quarters very, very common. Getting a sawed-off shotgun that you can still use in melee and blast stuff in the face is extremely, wonderfully useful and damaging. Then there's the other range weapons if you want bolas, bows, throwing knives, that kind of stuff. There's section on explosives with nitroglycerin if you really want to play around with that. And then vehicles and conveyances, which is going to cover your boats, buckboards, buggies, carriages, stagecoaches, that type of stuff. They have a section on infernal devices. I won't get too deep into them. Now, this is Ghost Rock powered stuff. Ghost Rock was found in the wake of the Great Quake. It's basically this black mineral with wisps of white going through it. It burns hotter than coal, longer than coal, and it screams when you burn it. It's extremely valuable. Most of the people who are going out west now are looking for ghost rock. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can get. There's armor, clothes. You can get a hat periscope. You can get elixirs and tonics, diving suits, jetpacks, flamethrowers. You can get vehicles. Now I went ahead and tagged this on, and this is I'll go and get to criticisms in a little bit. But needless to say, vehicles are expensive. But you can get a steam wagon. You can get a motorcycle. All right, so here's the fun part. Life in the Weird West, the next chapter. This is one, it is highly recommended that as a player, you read the first part of this book. It's going to give you some background information on this chapter specifically, is going to give you the stuff that you really need to know. Here is getting from point A to point B in the West. I don't know if you guys realize, but the Western United States is a big damn place. Driving coast to coast right now takes, like, I know I have at one point driven from California to Florida, and it takes a straight week of driving, 3 days of which is in Texas. The West is big. It is wide open areas where you will see nothing. Now imagine that before you have cars. They've got rules for hoofing it, either on foot or on a horse, more likely. Don't go on foot, you will die. Stagecoaches for longer trips, which is a much more reliable way to do things, but do tend to get ambushed. And then finally, if there's a rail line, riding the rails. Train travel is huge out west. Historically, it was huge. Modern day, it's not. It was only relatively recently when cars became the big method of travel. I mean, up through the middle of the century, people were riding trains out west all the time. Dinero. Here's a section about money. Now, this is one that I personally generally ignore, but if you've got somebody who really likes getting the nickels and dimes and nuts and bolts of money, talks about how out west most paper money is not honored. I mean, you're talking about sometimes you've got different nations, you've got different territories, all manner of different governments. Most people will love having metal coins, and there's a little section on currency. Communication, how you get in touch. The telegraph is the fastest way to do things, and then there's government mail or the Pony Express. This stuff takes a long time. If you get stuck out in the West, do not expect reinforcements anytime soon. Here is a section on ghost rock. Just to give you an idea, a burning nugget of ghost rock reaches about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. A lit core, which is like kind of a refined thing that's designed to move faster, can hit 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. The fireboxes and most gizmos that use ghost rock cores are drafted so steady flow of air, so they can get to 2500 degrees Fahrenheit. You can get the really big ones going to 3000. That kind of heat can create a tremendous amount of power. And then there's all sorts of stuff about what happens when they explode, because of course they do. Here's a section on the U.S. Army, because out west, that's probably the closest thing you're going to find to the cavalry, and they're not always going to help you out. And then there is a section on the law, which you're going to run into more commonly. Here's a nice little sidebar on the most common crimes and the punishment. Keep in mind, horse thieving, sentence, hanging. Rustling, offense, hanging. Murder, hanging. Rape, hanging. Unnatural acts, hanging. Yeah. That is generally considered in this game to be witchcraft. You get caught being a magic user or a huckster, they will hang you. Keeps on going on about the law and order and exactly how this winds up working with circuit courts and the difference between U.S. Marshals and Rangers. And then a little section on the fact that in this place in the West where they're isolated, exactly how superstitious people will be, and they will get superstitious. No time for the nuts and bolts of this stuff. Guns. There is not a big difference realistically in real life. There's not a big difference between single action and double action revolvers. This one, single action allows you to take the double tap edge. Single action allows you to take the fan and the hammer edge. Double actions let you take the double tap edge. Fan and the hammer is basically when you have a single action revolver, you hold down the trigger, and you just slap the hammer back a couple times, and you can unload the entire cylinder in just a second or two. Here's the big setting rule: dueling. Basically sets up a duel as being like a small game of Texas Hold'em. Sorry, no, they're back to having a draw type. It used to be Texas Hold'em. What happens if you wind up getting strung up? how stampedes work, because of course those things are going to happen. It's a Western. All right. No Man's Land. No Man's Land is the section of Pinnacle books in Deadlands where you don't want your players reading them unless they are a specific type of character. This is going to go ahead and explain a little bit about the supernatural that's happening. And now we're going to break up into the different types of characters that you can play that would be a little bit more supernaturally invested. I'm not going to go through these because, quite frankly, if your GM doesn't want you to go through them, then you're not going to. We'll go through the archetypes later on. But this goes on for a bit. Next, we are on to the Game Master section. This is when they're going to go and start telling you everything about the supernatural, how this happened, the martial setting rules. This is the stuff that the GM is going to need to know. I'm not going to go over it too much. I'm just going to page through it. And then we get to the other stuff that the GM can use, encounters. Many Savage World settings have an adventure generator where you can just pull some cards on some random tables and come up with the bones of a scenario that you can then flesh out. Really useful thing if you want to just do something quick, and then there's some general encounters depending on where you are and what these things means. All right, then we have the Weird West. We have a brief rundown on history up to this point. You have talk about the servitors, which we will get to later on. A little bit of history on the previous campaigns that they've done, and then the Gazetteer of the Weird West, where they have a very, very brief rundown of the different stuff that you will run into and see in the different regions of the Weird West. And this also goes on for quite a bit because this is one of the areas you're going to need to know. Section on the Great Rail Wars. The Great Rail Wars. There was a back after the quake, the federal government issued a 10-year monopoly on whoever would complete the Transcontinental Railroad first. And 6 of the major rail companies came to open arms and started hiring security and private armies to get there. All right, then we have Rascals, Varmints, and Critters. No, Rascals, Varmints, and Creatures, they're calling it now, not Critters. This is where you're going to get all of your little NPCs that you're going to need. Game stats of a whole bunch of them. The Varmints are your normal, everyday animals, and then Creatures, which are monsters. And by the way, Creatures, I'm not even going to page through this, but it goes from page 155 to the end of the book at the index. That is a lot of monsters. So there is your overall overview of this particular book. Fantastic production quality, fantastic art, all the game design is top-notch. This is not the view of somebody who has paged through this book. This is not somebody who has read this book. This is somebody who has been actively playing this since this version, since the PDFs were available from the Kickstarter. I've been playing Deadlands actively since the 90s. I am a Deadlands fanatic. I am very familiar with the setting, which means now we can start getting into some of the more in-depth, deep dive, nuanced parts of this particular review. First, what I would like to do is I'm going to go and take a look through these archetype cards. And we're going to have a very, very brief discussion on each one of them, a little bit less brief in some cases, over the changes that have been made from the previous iteration. And this is going to be useful for the people who are coming from the previous version. Now, agents. To be completely honest, agents really haven't changed all that much. There's an edge you can take to be an agent. It's a professional edge. It gives you access to favors, gives you access to promotions, you get paid, all that kind of stuff. You get a Gatling pistol, yada, yada, yada. Relatively straightforward. We're going to come back to Blessed. Chi Masters. Surprisingly enough, Chi Masters, compared to the stuff that was added in the Flood, they're mostly unchanged. I mean, it's still arcane background. What used to be called superpowers is now called gifted. The big change that Chi Masters got is with the addition of the PowerPoint modifiers. So all spellcasters changed pretty significantly with the addition of the PowerPoint modifiers. But aside from that, Chi Masters didn't really change all that much. For those not in the know, One of the methods of magic is traditional Eastern martial arts, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Laotian, anywhere from Eastern Asia. I'm also going to set these aside when I talk about magic because we'll get more into that. But because there was a very large Asian population in the West, especially in California, that has been brought over into Deadlands. Explorers, they're effectively unchanged. Gunslingers are largely unchanged. Just if you played a gunslinger in the previous edition, you want to do one in this one, I would recommend making yourself aware of the new dueling rules because they have changed. Harrowed. Oh my, how Harrowed have changed. Dominion got a complete reboot, a completely different system that I really, really like. As mentioned beforehand, now, first off, Harrowed is an arcane background. Where are the edges on these guys? Edges, yeah, Harrowed. It's an actual arcane background. You can take Harrowed. You can be a Harrowed character at character creation. Which is great. I mean, if you want to be that undead, if you want to be the quick, if you want to be the quick, the good, the bad, and the undead, the quick and the undead, you can do that from level 1 now, which is fantastic. And I know they did this in Lost Colony, but I just want to bring it up that I love the fact that you can play what type of character you want to from the get-go. Dominion got completely worked over. Now you actually full on get the undead ability as Harrow. That's +2 toughness, +2 spirit rolls for cover being shaken. You ignore a point of wound penalties. You get the whole shebang for being undead. Just that ability. You are hell on wheels, and that is not including your harrowed edges, of which there are quite a few. The new Dominion system, the fact that you can voluntarily let your Manitou out and to go ahead and wreak havoc, and you are hell on wheels when you do that. It's like having conviction every turn. It's amazingly powerful, but my God, do you pay for it because the devil gets his time to play. It's got that wonderful card that you get to draw just to make your players squeal and make their teeth itch and make them super uncomfortable and let your sadistic streak out. I love 100% straight improvement to the manner in which Harrowed are treated. Hexslingers. Hexslingers they're doing a lot more about them being rune inscribed weapons and whatnot. So they've gotten a little bit of a change in the facelift. We're going to go and touch bases. Hucksters. Hucksters are mostly unchanged. The big change that there are two big things that they got that are different. The first off is the same with all spellcasters, the power modifiers from Adventure Edition. The second off is dealing with the devil was reworked. For those of you who are outside the know, hucksters are one of the major types of arcane background, where basically Edmund Hoyle, the guy who wrote Hoyle's Book of Games back in, I think, 1773, I want to say. I could be wrong on that. It was way, way back in the day. It was like 100 years before Deadlands came out. Managed to figure out a way to mentally contact the spirit realm and find these Manitous and force them to cast spells by engaging with them in the games of chance and skill. Modern hucksters use poker, but they're kind of like a Wild West gambler type, playing cards with the devil for their power. And if you don't want to use power points, or you just need to do something you don't have the spell for. It used to be that just you did this for power points. Now you don't have the spell. You can potentially just do it. You can actually play a quick poker hand to go ahead and get that spell off. Just, it's not a good idea to lose that because, bad things happen. Mad Scientists, the powers of the new science. Ghost Rock stuff, they still make their gizmos. They're still weird science from the Savage Worlds core book. Their big thing, once again, power modifiers and an Adventure Edition, which does make wizards feel more like wizards. The other big thing is that now, instead of it just being a straight malfunction roll that deals damage, now their critical failure has their own separate roll with all sorts of majestic and wonderful things that can go wrong. I'm a big fan of that. Critical failures now are a lot less common than they were before, but they're more devastating, so they're more impactful. We'll get more to Mad Scientists later. Native Warrior have basically not changed at all. So if you want to be a big beefy melee combatant fighting, you can still do that. Territorial Rangers. Because the change was made that the Civil War is no longer dragging on, they're no longer Texas Rangers, they're Territorial Rangers. Functionally speaking, this means that the organization of the Texas Rangers is no longer the big powerhouse that was in the previous editions of Deadlands. Instead, territorial rangers are there to police the different territories. And that's basically the difference between U.S. Marshals and territorial rangers. Rangers patrol territories, Marshals patrol states. Medicine Woman, I think this is the archetype for being a shaman. Shamans are almost identical to what they were before, with obviously the modifiers for powers. There is an edge that shamans can take now that allows them to take one of their powers, and that power no longer inflicts a multi-action penalty. The shaman that I have in my standard group that my fiance is playing, he has the character has a boost lower trait for his spirit's blessing with no multi-action penalty. So Wami just does that every single turn, and it's amazing. Okay, we're going to set those aside. When we talk about magic, we're going to get closer to that, and we're going to talk about them more. So we're not talking about mechanically huge changes. The biggest changes are when they come to the setting. Now, I have a bunch of stuff that I've got marked in here: positive, negative, the good, the bad, and the undead. And the undead are kind of just like, huh. So we're going to start going through on the things that I like, the things that I'm critical about, and the things that are just kind of like lateral moves that I just like, kind of things that are discussion points that I'd like to talk about. So first off, Cowboys and Zombies. I like the fact that they are specifying that there are multiple ways to play this game. It is not directly stated, but the four like major regions of Deadlands I almost see as being different types of horror. Where you get the Great Plains, everything from like Texas all the way up to the border, where you have the two different Indian nations, where it's wars territory. Yeah, by the way, from this point on, if you are not a player and you don't want to know spoilers, stop watching right now, because we're going to be talking about a lot of spoilers, and we're going to get deep into the world of Deadlands. I kind of always view the Great Plains and that area of wars territory as being very much action horror. When you move over into Deseret, where you're dealing with Pestilence's territory, that is very much, I think, focusing more on the steampunk aspect and kind of like, for lack of a better term, the corruption and falling of that freedom way of life. Up in the West Coast and getting up into like the Northwest, where in your Famine's territory, that's more about the hardship of the West. While I view the Southwest, where it's death territory, as being very much more the atmospheric, just deadly horror. Kind of even verging into like stuff that Call of Cthulhu will teach you to do. But I like the fact that they go ahead and put that in the book. All right. Over here in the when I did this to call out gallows humor, I think that this is delightfully flavorful. I do like the fact that they have a call out difference between fanning the hammer and double tapping. It's a very, very minor difference. Quick draw, I like the fact that quick draw now does more than just let you draw with a free action, because everybody can. Now it lets you give bonuses to initiative and interrupt people. I'm going to pull these off as I go through them. Gear and goods, I know I mentioned it. El Cheapo horses, this is fantastic. I love this. I love this, love this, love this. I desperately, desperately want one of my players to try to cheap out and get a cheap horse. That gives me so much to play around with. Next point to be very happy about. Oh, this is necessarily a happy thing so much as I do want to point it out. That once again I commented that by the way the rules work, Gatling, carbines, rifles, and shotguns, you don't actually get a benefit unless you're firing unless you're holding the trigger down more than once, or you take the rock and roll edge. You have to basically build into it to really use these things properly, but they're also automatic weapons in the Wild West. I mean, I don't have a problem with this being something you build into, because when you do build into it, and currently in my game, our agent, she has rock and roll with her Gatling pistol, and holy crap, does she lay down some fire. It's fantastic. It makes you really feel like you're building your character that way. All right, vehicles. I don't know why I have a purple one here. Now, before I start getting into my criticisms, I want to go ahead and make it very clear that I am critical of things that I love. My criticisms of this do not change the fact that I think that this is a 9 out of 10 product. This is an outstanding product, and please do not interpret my criticisms as being things that I think make the game bad, so much as they're things that I think could have been done better. I love this game, and I just want it to be as good as possible. So it has been an ongoing kind of bee in my bonnet about Deadlands for a while. That the infernal devices, the vehicles, are just not feasible. I have only had a character use one time, and I hand waved a lot of the fuel costs. So these run off of Ghost Rock cores that cost $150, and a steam wagon, which is your standard, travels 50 miles per 1 pound Ghost Rock fuel core. For $150, you're traveling 50 miles. That's $3 per mile. Now, mind you, you're traveling at 50 miles an hour, so you are moving fast. And if you have to get from point A to point B really friggin' fast, this is a way to do it, and you don't have to be on rails. I'm not saying they don't have their uses. What I'm saying is, if you are having to spend $3 per mile you travel, your characters are going to have no money ever. They will be eternally broke and won't be able to buy bullets, beans, and bandages. It's just kind of a general criticism I've had, that in addition to the fact that these things are stupidly expensive. I mean, we're talking that same steam wagon costs $1,500. If you have $1,500 in the Wild West, you're talking about buying land and property. They're very expensive. Maintaining them is very expensive. Fixing them is expensive. I just don't see the feasibility of player characters having these unless they're actively provided by the government. And kind of one of the whole points of the Western setting is it being about freedom and breaking away from that. So it's just a criticism. I mean, especially when you get into the really expensive ones like the aircraft, which I think the idea of the aircraft, of having an air carriage, I think that is cool as hell. But then you're getting 25 miles for $150. It's $6 a mile. As cool as it is, you're never going to see it in play. And not unless you're basically playing a Monty Hall type campaign. And that's, I would just like to see that stuff be more available. All right, Life in the Weird West. This is another one where I'm very, very happy that they put this in. No, Sanctum Seraph, thanks. I'm cool. Sanctum Seraph says I'm cool as hell. Thank you very much. I am also back to Scotch because I had my birthday and I received a lot of Scotch for my birthday. All right. I'm happy with the fact that they actually portray travel as something that is tiring. Sanctum Seraph, no. He asks, have I painted all my minis yet? No. I am a wargamer. I will go to my grave with unpainted minis. I have plenty unpainted. We're taking a little bit of a break from painting today, and I'm doing an in-depth review of Deadlands the Weird West because I got my physical Kickstarter pledge in. So we are going through the good, the bad, and the undead of my favorite RPG setting. So I like the fact that even on a stagecoach, you still have to make vigor rolls to not get exhausted from these trips because they're not exactly pleasant by today's standard. I also like the fact that travel is a big deal, and most people think of just riding a horse across the West, and this is not how it always worked. So I appreciated that. All right, so now we're going to get to what is probably my biggest criticism of. This is my biggest criticism of this book. And one of the things about Deadlands that I have loved, and this is one of the things that I absolutely adore, is that for everything where the magic system in Deadlands looks hard, sorry, it looks soft. It looks like a really soft, loosey-goosey magic system. It is not. It is actually a hard system. I've often heard it said that the difference between a hard magic system and a soft magic system is a lot of limitations. Basically, all magic in Deadlands emerges from an area called the Hunting Grounds. It's this spirit realm where the Manitous, nature spirits, and other spirits live. In order for a human to basically be a spellcaster in any way, shape, or form, they need to find something to channel that energy through. Originally in Deadlands, there were 4 different arcane backgrounds, where your hucksters would be the stereotypical spellcasters. They would find a Manitou to do their bidding and basically deal with the devil in order to cast the spell. The shamans would perform rites and sacrifices to appease nature spirits, and the nature spirit would channel the energy for them. Mad scientists are magic users, where Manitous actually whisper secrets into their ears to fill in the gaps in their technology to allow these things to work. They effectively use the same stuff as hucksters. And then the Blessed would basically just, their god allows them to do it. And it wasn't really, most of the other people who really study were like, we don't really know exactly how it works, but it just does, and it just doesn't go badly for them. But they have to follow the tenets of whatever their religion is. Another thing that I like is that when they say blessed, obviously the stereotype and the archetype is like a Baptist or Methodist preacher out in the West with their Bible preaching the Lord's word. And I've had plenty of blessed that were like that. But then I've also had a blessed that was more of like a backwoods prophet type. I've seen one where the character was a rabbi. There's nothing saying you have to be a Christian for it. It's just, if you are a generally monotheistic religion, or a religion that views themselves as largely monotheistic, back in the old days of when Deadlands was its own system, Blessed would cover Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, anything where it was a mostly monotheistic religion. Well, when you're dealing with more of like more of like a tribal type religion with spirit worship or a polytheistic religion, then you would want to use shamans. And I thought that was great. And it was almost like a divide between the white magic and the black magic. Now, because this was the case, they also did this thing where if you generally could not combine arcane backgrounds, because then you would get like chi masters, which were added very, very quickly in the original Deadlands, and are basically just considered the 5 of like the standard. Chi masters and martial artists, they would use their own body as like a tuning fork, where the attitude is, what basically, once you figured out how to do this with your body, just nothing else would deal with you at that point, because you're channeling yourself, and the spirits have a bad idea. They don't like that. But mad scientists and hucksters, they use the same power source. So if you had a mad scientist who believed in the supernatural, they could absolutely become a huckster, and these two could work with each other, and you could be a mad scientist and huckster, which led to metal mages, which were a thing and are amazing. And they're in the companion. I'm not reviewing that now, but let's just say that the new metal mages are chef's kiss. So that being said, what's one of the things I like about Deadlands is that everything is very logical and everything works. And the Blessed they're still logical. But what kind of irritates me about the Blessed is that there is almost nothing now to differentiate the Blessed from other types of arcane magic. There are a couple of Blessed edges where you can get your standard free reroll, but a lot of people can do that. You can get extras, but there's a lot of different ways to do that. It's just that, especially when you compare the Blessed to shamans, which I take a look at them and it's like, okay, they're you need a spirit, a decent spirit. Your arcane skill is the same. Your arcane skill for both of them is faith based on spirit. You have 15 power points. It's 3 powers with holy symbol being one of them versus 2. You have to worry about the precepts of your religion, which you're going to do anyway if you're a player character, versus you don't. It just, they even have the same backlash. And it just bothers me that you have in the previous editions where the Blessed felt like their completely own different thing. And all the arcane backgrounds felt very unique, very different. And even from a mechanical standpoint, they didn't resemble each other at all. But now, Blessed and Shamans, they basically feel like the same mechanics with a different religion. And that is something that I feel it's a missed opportunity. I feel like they could have done what they did in the previous edition, where kept the Blessed with their no PowerPoint system and just refined that a little bit, and then had Shamans give them an ability to do some sort of a right to recover PowerPoints faster. Like maybe they go ahead and under duress, they can go ahead and like show ritual scarring or ritual maiming, or going ahead doing their face paint, or doing their dance or sweat lodge, or smoking their peace pipe, or doing any number of the rituals that are so important to that religion to gain more power points when needed. I would have preferred to see that, or even incorporate some of the ritual magic systems from earlier editions. But as it stands right now, Blessed and Shamans mechanically are almost identical, and I just feel like that's a missed opportunity. So, that being my criticism of the different types of magic, Harrowed, I can't possibly be happier with how the Harrowed looked. They're fantastic. I love it. I absolutely love it. Hucksters, I think that the change in Deal with the Devil, the fact that now you have to spend a Benny in order to do it, and you can cast any power you need by dealing with the devil, so it's a fantastic utility box, but holy crap, can it go bad for you? I went through the Flood for a year, full year campaign. The Huckster we had in the group by the end dealt with the devil for every single spell he cast, because it got to the point where there's almost no chance of it going badly. Hex Slingers are a seasoned edge, which kind of lends credence to my ability that I do believe that the game intends for people to start it seasoned. I like the fact that you still have the option for the Watley Blood. Mad Scientists, outside of largely unchanged. I do question a little bit that there is one thing in here for Ore Eater where you can go ahead and basically derive power points by eating Ghost Rock. It gives you an additional 5 power points when the edge is taken, but that is absolutely no different from taking the power points edge. The only difference is that Ore Eater you can take in addition to power points, which can only be taken once per rank. I mean, I guess it's something that you can do if you really want to start out with all the power points, but especially with the new edition where you can cash in a Benny for power points and you just rest to recover a crap load. The difference between starting with 15 power points versus 20 power points versus 25 versus if you're starting at season 30 versus 25. Once you get to like the difference between 25 and 30 power points, you're not really facing that big of a difference. So I'm just kind of wondering why that got put in. I think I just think it could have been a little bit more interesting mechanically. Shamans, once again, that was my criticism, is that at the moment they're basically the identical to the Blessed. New powers. This is another thing this is more of a layout criticism that I have, where I do think that I would have rather seen the new powers listed with the arcane background that can use them. Like Ammo Whammy, only Hucksters and Hexslingers can do that. Wilderness Walk is strictly a Shaman thing. Sanctify is a Blessed and Shaman thing. But I would like to see it like just with the arcane background for ease of reference. All right, so for moving to the martial setting rule, this is another one that I feel was more of a missed opportunity than anything. So Black Magic. It's effectively arcane background magic from the core book. Just the only thing is that they get free rerolls when they fail if they're in a high fear level area. I really, really feel like this is a missed opportunity because it's kind of like the same thing with the Blesses and Shaman, that it just feels generic. It doesn't feel like this is really like a dark forbidden magic. I would have preferred it to be that maybe they can like do the Watley blood magic, but on other people. They get the ritual magic system. They can go ahead and use blood instead of power points. Something to make it like dark and foreboding and grim. Instead of it just being, oh yeah, when things are spooky, they get better. So that's kind of something it just irritates me. Here we go, the Dominion table for Harrowed. Very, very big positive. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Mad Science having its own malfunction table and Madness table. I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. It's just going to make things far, far more interesting. The Adventure Generator. I mean, I know that this is nothing new. I know that they do this in every Savage World setting, but I'm still amazed every time I run this game, every time I run a Savage setting, how useful this is. Having these random tables to just give you a general framework for an adventure, and then you can fill in the bones with your character's backstory and the stuff that they've done already. It's just fantastic, and I wish more games would do it. Let's move on. So this is kind of a... All right. So the setting changes. There have been a few setting changes, and this is an actual retcon. In the previous editions of Deadlands, it can be 1880, and the Civil War is still kind of happening. It may be at a ceasefire because both sides have just run out of resources. However, and I do understand that in the current political climate, portraying the Confederacy as anything but wrong, it winds up causing problems, and people have a very difficult time dealing with it. In reality, the U.S. Civil War was very nuanced. There were a lot of things that were happening. The core question was the right to own slaves, and it was very clearly now, looking back, that one side was wrong. But when it winds up coming to the idea of it being a horror game, I personally don't have a problem with there being people who are either misguided or black-heartedly evil in a horror game. At the same time, I understand the reasoning for doing it, and I understand it removes a lot of uncomfortable aspects at people's tables. This is one where I didn't put it as a criticism. I didn't put it as a positive, more of a lateral move. I personally don't care one way or the other. If it means that some people have an easier time playing this game, then great, it's a positive. Quite frankly, the stuff that was happening back east in Deadlands and the Civil War doesn't really affect the game. You're talking about being out west, you're talking about trying to get away from all that. Instead of it being the Civil War, it's about reconstruction of the railroads. Doesn't actually change anything storyline-wise, and that's why you can kind of jettison that, and it doesn't change the game very much. Now, I do like that they added a little thing of the Morgana effect of why things changed, and they had a little bit of time travel muckety-muck. There's been a bit of time travel muckety-muck in Deadlands from the get-go. So there's that. Honestly, the only really big thing that changes is it just removes the Texas Rangers and puts them into Territorial Rangers, which I do still hope that they wind up making some sort of like maybe a supplement or a PDF talking about the Texas Rangers and throwing in the Rangers Bible and their shoot 'em and recruit it aspect. Just because I'd kind of like to see that. They do still have like kind of a governmental interagency rivalry between the agency and the Rangers, because the Rangers are basically like the Stadies and the agency is the feds. They're both trying to hunt monsters, but their jurisdictions kind of bump up next to each other and there's some friction. But now it means that they're not working on opposite sides of warring nations. So from a player character standpoint, it actually fits better, because even though you'll get people who generally don't like each other, they're not actively on different sides of a war, which can make things much more difficult if you have both a ranger and an agent in the party. The other big thing that I do want to mention here, they talk about the servitors, which they're the four. So the big bads in Deadlands, the Reckoners, you wind up finding out in Hell on Earth, one of the future settings, that they're basically the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and each one has a human agent in the West that is actively doing their work. There are 4 campaigns: the Flood, Last Sons, A Stone in a Hard Place, and Good Intentions, that deal with these 4 servitors, and it's this giant meta plot that happens. One of the things that I kind of got away from Deadlands, because I ran the Flood and I had some pretty big criticisms of that book as well. Metaplot is great, and world-shattering events are fine, but they wind up feeling a lot more like D&D, and a lot less like... It makes the game less intimate. And that's why when Pinnacle announced that the new Deadlands was going to be a return to local horror, that I was so happy about it. Now everything is back to being very personal, very localized, and it's about taking care of the monster that's terrifying this particular area or this particular community. And having your posse go in, shoot at the bad guys, fight the monster, tell the tale, and then ride off into the sunset. It winds up feeling more Western to me, but also it winds up just feeling a lot more personal. And I appreciate that. I really, really like that. And I think that is more than anything in this, I think that's my favorite addition to the new Deadlands. The meta plots were fun to read. It lost something in translation. I love the more personal stories that are being told now. But they do go ahead through the different meta plots and detail them. So the Gazetteer of the Weird West. This is something where I don't know if I'm going to call it a criticism. I don't know if I'm going to call it something I like. I don't even know if I'm going to call it a lateral move. This is real skimpy from what I expected. I would, in previous editions, I would expect this to be an extra probably 15, 20 pages. As it stands right now, the Gazetteer, which is, all of the specific aspects of the setting and the different places that you're going to, including the Great Rail Wars, which is a huge part of the setting. I mean, you're talking about going from page 114 to 143. Less than 30 pages to detail the nuts and bolts of the setting. I have a theory that you can tell what the focus of a role-playing game is based on the page count assigned to different topics. Deadlands still is about the setting. There are more pages in this book assigned to talking about the setting, whether it's life in the Weird West, the setting rules, the actual Gazetteer. There's more in there than there is towards any other aspect. But that being said, it's not by a wide margin. Page 154 to page 194. 40 pages. The largest single section is monsters. Which tells me that monsters are a very important part of this game, and they are. I like the fact that they are, but it's monsters and setting. So if you want to know what Deadlands is about, it's not about your player characters using their abilities to be badasses. It's not about getting from point A to point B in heavy exploration. It is about the setting, the atmosphere, and the monsters that are causing the problems. That's what this game is about. And that's what, if you focus on, you'll have basically the traditional Deadlands. Side note, Lost Angels is Fear level 4. So the flood happened, Grim was killed, and they're doing a reform, so the Fear level is dropping in Lost Angels. Oh, that was something I didn't mention. Inside, I think it might be a little bit later, though. I didn't see the martial setting rules. Yeah, no, it was earlier. Martial setting rules. This is something I didn't mention before. This is another straight improvement. The way the fear level works has been overhauled. Fear level is an important part of Deadlands. It basically says that the spookier things are, and the more scared people are, because everything runs off of fear. Fear is the energy that the Reckoners use to manifest in the world. Beforehand, you would get a penalty to your fear rolls based on the fear level, and you still do. But you used to be a 1-for-1 basis, so if the fear level is 1, you'd get -1, 2, you'd get -2, 3, you'd get -3, and then you'd add your rank beyond novice. Well, you'd add your rank to it. So fear level 1, you get -1, but novice, you get +1. Fear level 2, seasoned, +1, +2, etc. Wound up just being kind of odd the way that worked, especially when you were talking about like resisting intimidation and the fact that you basically wound up getting it so almost every fear roll you made was at a penalty. So your characters would be really skittish unless they built into being brave. Well, now, fear level 1, well, you don't get your rank bonus to your fear checks anymore. There's a couple of edges that wind up helping you out with that. But fear level 1, fear level 2, no penalty. Fear level 3 is -1, 4 is -2, 5 is -3, 6 is -4. And 6 is the highest you'll go. And I kind of like this more because now, like, the best you can do is +2 with a reroll. So if you're in a Deadland, the absolute best you're looking at is fear level is making a spirit check at -2 with a reroll. That's your best case scenario. if you're in the middle of a Deadland, and there are not many Deadlands in this game, they are rare and terrifying. In addition to dealing with the fact that there are monsters around every friggin' corner, you're always taking big penalties to your fear checks. I like that. I like that fact that your characters aren't necessarily skittish, but just the really scary parts of the world are really friggin' scary. So I think it's just a nice. I think it is a better way of doing it. All right. You know, moving through more stuff. Deseret, Dodge, all that kind of stuff. Indian country. You do get you get a little bit of a brief description on everything. I like that it does let you fill in the gaps, but at the same time, I would like more elaboration for just the lore junkie in me. That's one of the things that you have to remember about Savage World settings is that the concept of being a canon junkie and a lore junkie really you got to kind of check that at the door when it comes to Savage World settings. Savage settings are not about learning the ins and outs of a detailed setting. They're about the functional running of a game. And I think the pragmatic streak in me is one of the reasons why I like Savage World so much. Everything is about the functionality at the table. This is not a game that is meant to be read. It's a game that is meant to be played. All right. Great Rail Wars. So in one of the big meta plots, the Great Rail Wars, basically one side won. Wasatch and Dr. Darius Hellstrom won the Great Rail Wars. I do like that they still go over the main barons, but I also like how they're still they're still fighting each other. It's just not an open warfare anymore. So it's kind of like more of a low level conflict instead of like an open warfare. So kind of like more simmering underneath. With the change that the Confederacy is no longer a thing, the Union and Confederate rails are no longer Union Blue and Dixie rails. Now, instead of the hero of Gettysburg, Joshua Chamberlain, runs Empire Rail out of, I believe, New York. And now instead of Dixie Rails, there's a Texas-based company called Lone Star. So basically, it's the two more American, but now they're not directly associated with the governments. So it makes more sense for the current world. Then they have a section on flashpoints where it's like these are the big battles where the stuff just still happens and how the Great Rail Wars are playing out, as well as the locations of where that's happening. All right, so Rascals, Varmints, and Critters. Now, as I stated, there's a lot of damn monsters in this book. There's a lot of monsters. I like that they're specifying now that supernaturally evil creatures ignore feared level, including Harrowed if the Manitou is in control. There's a lot of monsters here. I love that there's a lot of monsters. I mean, Animated Hand, Automaton, Aztec Mummies, the Black Regiment, which is, I love using the Black Regiment in games. Bloodwire, Bone Fiend, the Boogeyman. The Boogeyman is one of my favorite Deadlands characters because he's basically immune to all damage unless you're a kid. And adults just can't see it and don't believe he exists. It's fantastic. I love it. You've got your Chinooks, your Chupacabras, your Desert Things, your Badlands Devil Bats, your Dust Devils, all of your really classic monsters. You've got your Faminites, which are terrifying. You've got your Ghouls, your Gloms, your Hanging Judges. You've got all of your typical stuff. The monsters are typical Deadlands. These things are scary as hell. You can have your guns, and half the time they just don't do anything. I got a little. No, that's just paint because I painted the sable. So lots and lots of monsters, all the stuff you'd expect, all the classics, all the stuff that even a bunch of stuff that's in like supplements. They added a lot of stuff in here to the point where I don't necessarily think that it's necessary for them to come out with a monster book. And then they got a good index. I always appreciate a good index. All right. So overall, I mean, I'm not super critical of this book, and I don't want people to think that even the criticisms I have means I think it's a bad book. This thing's coming out in 2020. This is available for retail sale in 2021. This is going to be one of the best role-playing game releases in the year 2021. It's coming out of the pandemic. They did a Kickstarter for it. It's tremendously successful. There is no point of this book that I feel is bad. The biggest criticisms I have are a couple spots that I think things could work better and a couple missed opportunities. Deadlands is. I cut my teeth with horror on Deadlands. I mean, Deadlands and Call of Cthulhu are my go-tos. I will fully admit to being a Deadlands fanboy. I absolutely adore this setting. I adore Savage Worlds. It's fantastic. I mean, 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's not perfect, but there's nothing bad in it. I think that everybody should have this. It's different. I mean, how many times are you going to sit down with your friends and say, we're going to play a Western? And normally getting people to get past that idea that it's a Western, the moment you start getting into it, it is just unbelievably fun. It's a completely different type of game. And if you are the type of person who has only experienced Dungeons and Dragons and you want to expand into something different, holy crap, is this a great way to do it. There's a lot that's freeing. There's a lot that's fantastic. And it is just overall a damn fun game. They're already releasing another adventure campaign for it. There is another box that came out with this called The Horror at Headstone Hill, which is a full campaign box set featuring Uina County, Wyoming, which has one of the coolest monsters in the entire game. One of the coolest monsters I've seen in tabletop role-playing, period. I've been doing this for 25 years. They've got Blood Drive coming out, which is an update of one of the old adventures. They showed no indication of not supporting this. It's good to get on the ground level, but even more than that, it's Deadlands. It's a classic setting. If you haven't picked it up yet, if you weren't part of the Kickstarter, buy it. You won't regret it. It's fantastic fun, even if you're just reading it. But these games beg to be played. They've got full virtual tabletop support, Fantasy Grounds, Roll20. I think the Foundry's probably coming. The guys from Pinnacle are a good group of people. Their customer service is fantastic. They put out top-notch product. If you haven't gotten into it yet, by all means do. But that's basically my review of this. I mean, I hope yammering on for an hour and a half isn't really going to be too much. And basically, the long and short of it is that I think that it's a great setting. And I think it's a great product. So pick it up, buy it. I'll return to mini painting next week. Debating on exactly what I'm going to do. I think I might do some Tyranids and go ahead and show you guys how I paint yellow. But yeah, until then, you guys have a good one. Enjoy your gaming and keep playing.